Good evening. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. On behalf of the events team here at RJ Julia, in conjunction with Temple Beth Tikva, we are so excited to welcome Naama Shefi, author of The Jewish Holiday Table, joined in conversation tonight with Loren Sterman. Naama Shefi is a culinary curator and a Jewish and Israeli food specialist. She's also the founder of the Jewish Food Society, a nonprofit organization that works to preserve, celebrate, and revitalize Jewish cuisine to build and promote a meaningful connection to Jewish and Israeli culture. Naama is a native Israeli who grew up in a kibbutz, eating at a communal dining room. Between 2008 and 2012, she was the director of public programs at the Israeli consulate in New York. Early on, she discovered the wide appeal Israeli food has as a window into its culture. She went on to recruit Israeli food personalities to be non-political ambassadors for her native country. In the summer of 2021, she launched ASIF, Culinary Institute of Israel, a center in Tel Aviv dedicated to exploring the diverse creative food culture of Israel. Of the Jewish Holiday Table, Michael W. Twitty, winner of the James Beard Award and Jewish Book Award, said, "This cookbook is like a family reunion told across tables that cross borders, time, tastes, and seasons. It tells our story in a way that is uniquely Jewish, joyful, and sparkling with life. It's a must-have." Loren Sterman created and ran a retail business called Cookworks. She had stores in Hamden and New Haven, which offered prepared foods for carryout, as well as housewares and gifts. Feeding people is all about nurturing them, and after almost 10 years of welcoming people into her space and hearing their stories, she realized she wanted to nurture in a different way and went back to school for a degree in social work. She currently works as a therapist in private practice. As a board member at Temple Beth Tikva, she is co-chair of the women's group Kol Ami and leads a special interest group called Cooking the Books, which takes a deep dive into the repertoire of well-known cookbook authors, bloggers, and chefs. Each month, they prepare a meal from one of their works. So without further ado, please welcome Naama Shefi and Loren Sterman.
Like having a party, but not having to clean up after. You know, it's really good. It's really good. I love the book, just love it. And one of the things that I loved most about it was the feeling of L'Ador Vador. And many of you may know that is the expression that means from generation to generation. And so your work, putting this work together comes clearly from a very deep place in me. I'm wondering, would you share with us your kibbutz story, your life on the kibbutz, and how that brought you to this place?
Sure, absolutely. And thanks for this warm introduction. It's so special to be here. Okay, so yes, I grew up on a small kibbutz. It's called Givat HaShlosha. It's in the center of Israel. It was a pretty fun place to be as a child. We were walking barefoot all the time, picking up pomegranates and figs and citrus from the trees, playing for many hours outside. Our parents didn't know what we were up to or where we were, but not everything was ideal. We ate all of our meals in the communal dining room together with 500 people. So the community part was lovely. The menu, a disaster. Yeah, truly. It was very repetitive, mostly Ashkenazi, but not the good Ashkenazi, and just very bland. And so, you know, I was very curious it was a little bit like the Truman Show. And I wanted to go outside of this bubble and to know more about the diversity of my country and meet other people and stories. And so food became this connection to the world outside of the kibbutz. But I grew up in the 1980s, and at the time at the kibbutz we shared everything, including cars. So the community had 18 Subaru cars, and you needed a good reason to get one, like to go to the doctor or to a wedding or a funeral, God forbid, something like that. But luckily, my parents were very supportive of my curiosity and always managed to get us one. So we were going to the neighboring Arab village of Kfar Qasim and to the Yemenite quarter and just different places. And really, food became a medium for identity exploration for me.
Something you said to me when you were talking about the pomegranates, and you talked about the seasonality of foods and how you use that as a time, you know what I'm talking about. Can you share that story with us? Because I think it's so interesting.
Sure. And I think that when people think about Jewish food, they don't often think how seasonal the cuisine is. And, you know, here in the States, when people ask when pomegranates are in season, you'll say September, or depends where you live. But, and in Israel, I would say Rosh Hashanah. You know, or when artichokes are in season, Passover. Like it's just very connected to the holiday. And I think that it's so beautiful. So we organize the book according to the Jewish agricultural calendar.
And it really works. So what was the moment though that inspired you to get down and create the Jewish Food Society, which was mentioned and is really the beginning, right?
Yeah, so I mean, there were probably, you know, many moments, but there was one that was very special, and it was when I met my husband, then boyfriend, and we were dating, and he invited me to a Shabbat dinner at his grandmother apartment, and it was this tiny little place, 1-bedroom apartment outside of Tel Aviv in a town called Givatayim. And he said, "You're gonna meet the entire family, like my parents, my uncle, like everyone at once." And Nona, his grandmother, as the family called her in Ladino, used to host these Shabbat dinners every Friday night, hosting 20 or so people. And I couldn't even imagine like how everyone would fit. It was like this, you know, tiny room. And sure enough, Ilan said, "It's like magic, you'll see." And she got room for everyone. And then Nana started to, first of all, she was just like so kind. And I felt very comfortable with her. And she started putting these plates and plates on the table. There were albondigas, these meatballs with tomato sauce, and many eggplant salads with different variation, and stuffed vegetables with meat, sweet chard pie, lots of things. And I was just like, hey, it was so delicious and generous and beautiful. And
A far cry from the kibbutz.
oh yeah. And I started asking questions like, how, you know, about this one and this one. And behind every dish, there was a story. It really described our journey from Izmir in Turkey. Across the water, the family moved to Greece, to Rhode Island. From there to Zimbabwe, and to escape the Nazis, and finally to Israel. And every dish really told a piece of the story. And I remember that people around the table, my new family, I mean, I didn't know back then, but I remember that many of them heard these stories for the very first time. And it, you know, it brought songs like a very important conversation for the family. And at the time my career was filmmaking, and my husband is also a filmmaker. And this night planted a seed. I left the dinner and I saw, okay, this is a treasure box. We need to protect it because Nana was 84 when we met, and I thought these recipes will disappear if we want to protect them. And more importantly, the stories behind the recipes. So the next day I came back, I put pen to paper, I started to take videos and photos, and it planted the seeds for the Jewish Food Society.
And one of the features that I love about the book, Naama, is the journey of each person who you've
Yeah.
memorialized in the book. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Thank you. And I think again, Nona, like I think what's very unique to us, to Jewish people, is that in the book and also on the archive of Jewish Food Society, where we have thousands of recipes and the stories behind them, it's important for us to put the journey. And unfortunately, Jewish families were forced oftentimes to leave their homes and to move sometimes to another city, sometimes to another country, and many times across continent. And you know, during these journeys, the recipes added these layers of flavors and meanings and connections. So it was always important for us to include these journeys, and there is no single recipe with like one origin in the book. They're all very diverse, and the food, you know, reflect that.
I'm sorry, I'm having a microphone issue.
Oh, I can help you.
No, do you want to read it? Either way, I just, yeah. So what, my next question for you was, exactly how do you preserve that family recipe? What's the mechanism?
So when we started Jewish Food Society, it was clear to us that it was important to cook with people in their homes. Because think about that. If you have your best friend, maybe your mom or grandma, maybe she's the best cook. And you said, hey, can I have like this recipe for a lasagna or for kube or for tweet or anything? Most of the chances that you want, like you know, if just you have like a phone call with the grandma, there is no way. Many times the people would be too shy, modest, like it's not going to translate to in a phone call. So we decided that when possible, we will spend time in people's home, because I believe that the kitchen is the most intimate setting of them all. And once you start to cook with someone and just to spend time in the kitchen, many things and feelings and connection, it's just like a natural thing. So, and this is true for the culinary aspect of things and also for the story. So for the culinary aspect, we're talking about many traditional recipes that sometimes are labor intense and time, like you really need to know, you know, some technique. And many of these recipes are written down in like this tzetalach, like, you know, like this, yeah, very casual way. So a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So when we're in the kitchen, we really translate all of these things into a working recipe. And we bring it back to the test kitchen and we develop it to be a strong recipe. And to your question on how exactly do you do that, there are a few tips that now I know. So if you want to learn a recipe from your relative, and I think it's very important to do that, I would prepare in advance. And I will ask the person to send you the recipe in advance. And the way they have it.
So at least when you come, you know what kind of questions you want to ask and you know what to look for, if so many times also there is time involved and other, so you already know what to look for. When possible, it's very important to take photos, to take videos. I mean, these are obvious, but they are really, really important because then you know what to look for. And then, of course, write down the names, all of the information, the hardcore information. I think we all think that we know where our grandparents came from, but then when you sit down and you see that there are so many pieces of the stories that are not known. So it's very important to get the names, spell them right, the dates, everything that you can in that same session.
I just have to ask, did anybody ever show you how to make pachal?
Yes.
My grandmother made pachal, and you could not enter her house. The smell of the garlic, the pepper.
Yeah.
For people who don't know, pachal is jellied calf's feet.
Oh.
And she made it as a special treat for my own.
But I think we should make it trendy again because it's like how in New York City at least we pay a lot of money to buy broths like beef broths or chicken. It's the same, but like jelly, yeah.
With egg.
So yes, I know but it has some. It can be chic. Really, so Vera Goldstein, the scholar, author, someone I really admire, she shared with us her mom's recipe for pacha, and also she shared an amazing story about a relationship with her mom around this dish. We have a podcast. It's a storytelling podcast. It's called Schmaltzy. It's about food and story. And Dara really shared the most incredible story about pacha.
I'll have to. And it does, it's the one thing that made my mother know that my grandmother loved her son better. So, everyone who likes to cook, loves to read cookbooks. This one is so unique. Can you tell us how you arrived at this idea and tell us more about it?
Sure. So first of all, it was a very collaborative effort with my co-author, Deborah First, and with the entire team of Jewish Food Society. I'm very fortunate to work with the most amazing, smart, passionate colleagues. So it's really a collaboration, this book. And in many ways, it's really like the highlights or the best of our research, which we started in 2017. So the idea, we were approached by Artisan, our publisher, in the early days of the pandemic, where the editor there saw that we're doing a lot of home cooking and cooking with mothers and grandmothers across Zoom. And she loved how we're celebrating this home cooking and storytelling. And she said, hey, let's talk about the cookbook. And we thought about different things. But at one point, it became very clear that Jewish holiday cooking should be the heart of that. And the reason why is because I feel that Jewish holidays is where you can find foods, dishes that are uniquely Jewish. And of course, there are many dishes in the book that are enjoyed and beloved and cooked by many people and communities, but there are just foods in the book for Jewish holidays that are a result of a text and ritual and that are special for the holiday. So we thought that would be a good way to organize the information. And then it was also important for us to showcase diversity because that's our it's so important for us. And when I moved to New York, I remember that I was so surprised by how people thought about Jewish food and the very narrow representation of Jewish food. And of course, like bagels and chopped liver and brisket and matzo ball, so they're all great, but there's so much more. So it was very important for us to highlight communities that are less represented, so in the book, there are communities that immigrated from Iraq to India, starting in the 18th century. And then the family that we profiled settled in London. There is another community that immigrated from Morocco to Brazil, North Brazil, and like their traditions are just so unique.
That this Ethiopian story, it just really, I was flabbergasted by it. So of course, you know that I'm gonna ask you, do you have a favorite? We won't tell anyone, nobody will know.
The characters in the book, by now, they're all friends and people I admire. So that was also like the stories behind the recipes were a criteria, like even before the deliciousness of the recipes, because there are so many delicious recipes, and it was important for us to tell important stories. So it's not really about like what I
Not favorite.
not
I didn't know
favorite,
but really touched you, was that?
yeah, absolutely. There is one that is very, very powerful, and the story was shared by Yonit Naftali with she's a food writer based in Tel Aviv, and she shared her grandmother's story. And her grandmother was one out of 10 kids, and only 3 survived Auschwitz. So after the war, she lost everything she had, her parents and most of her family, obviously everything. And she really held on to her mom's recipes. So religiously, she would bake and cook for every Jewish holiday the very same way that her mother used to bake. Like everything, even with modern times and inventions, it was important and still important to the family to make the recipes the exact same thing. So Yonit shared with us that when she was a kid, it was embarrassing for her to bring the mishloach manot, the package for Purim, with that you exchange.
Do you want to, can we define that for folks?
Sure. So mishloach manot, it's like a care package of sorts that typically has hamantations or sweets, sometimes wine, candies. Many times they could be store-bought or homemade.
It's a great thing to receive.
Very important. It's very nice. And as a kid, her responsibility was to carry the mishloach manot to her neighbors. And she was embarrassed to share these Hungarian pastries, the bagli and fluden, with her friends, because they lived in a town that most of the friends were from North Africa. And she told to her mom, can you just give me like store-bought like candies? And now as a mom, by the way, I totally understand that, because I embarrass my daughter a lot. So I really understand, I understand that. So one day when a neighbor brought back the plate, because that was old school times, the actual plate, the neighbor told Yonit, I'm waiting for your mishloach manot the entire year. And so she shared that was like that moment the shame, develop into pride. And for me, we're talking about the story, like from grief to loneliness in a new country and acceptance, all through food. So I find it very powerful.
I have to look back and look at Forum.
It's a good, we call it table. It's a good spread, this chapter. Like it's really good.
Maybe while you're answering this next question, I'm gonna look for it so I can pull up some pictures. You've been talking about Jewish food and Jewish food from every country, every society. What is Jewish food for you?
So we can probably spend the night here. To sleep over. Yes, like, of course, we can talk about it for so long, and I don't think there is one standard definition. But for me, it is. When I think about Jewish food, I think about Jewish people who lived in the diaspora for thousands of years, and wherever they lived, they created their own micro cuisine that were a result of this constant negotiation between Jewish kosher laws and keeping the Shabbat and holidays in negotiation with local food traditions and ingredients. And on top of that, we talked about it before, we are adding another layer of a cuisine of wanderings. Like you develop these unique dishes, but then you are moving from this place to another and you pick even more flavors. So the result is a very global cuisine in its nature. And yeah, I think that's how I think about that.
Add the layer of Israeli food, if you will.
So I think about Israeli food as a different concept. Like, obviously, there are a lot of overlap, but I think about these two as separate. And I think what's interesting is that when we think about how Jewish food developed, we think about all of the Jewish community around the world and with the very unique foods, but these communities, they don't exist, most of them, anymore. But they do exist in Israel. And not only they exist, they flourish in terms of culinary creativity. So I think that's where the two concepts meet, because Israeli cuisine, again, we can talk about it separately for a long time, but there are many influences in the cuisine, and one of them, and maybe the most important one, is Jewish ethnic food. So I'm thinking about, for example, a dish like sabich, which is a very popular street food in Israel. It's a sandwich in a pita, and it has eggplants and amba and hard-boiled egg and parsley. And it's a very popular dish in Israel, but it actually originated in Shabbat breakfast that Jewish people enjoyed in Iraq. And the tradition was that after they came back from synagogue, for Shabbat lunch, for Saturday, they used to fish the eggs from this overnight Shabbat stew of chicken and rice. So for breakfast, they had the chaminados, the brown eggs, together with, they just had a cold spread of eggplants, pita, amba, which is a condiment that's made from unripe mangoes, and parsley, and sometimes other things. And it was only decades later that one gentleman started to get a kiosk, and his name was Sabich. And he he brought the leftover eggplants and like from his home and packaged it and and sell it this way. So people started saying like sabich, like
There's a
and
beautiful picture of one in the book that makes you just your mouth water. And I did find the gift. I do want to share the Hungarian, because it's beautiful and Hungarian.
so nice. Thank you.
So I think we, one last question quickly, because I'm getting the eye there.
Oh, okay.
And I know that people have questions for you, but film director, food society, cookbook author, Asif, a culinary school. Tell us about it.
So ASIF is the Culinary Institute of Israel, and we do all sorts of stuff there. It's a very special place. It's almost like a museum. Like we have, there are a few sections. So first of all, we have a culinary public library where with 3,000 culinary titles in many languages. And we curated this collection in collaboration with 20 different chefs and scholars. We mentioned Dara Goldstein before. She contributed her list. Chef Sami Tamimi, Adina Sussman, like different people with different perspective. And we asked them, what do you think that we should highlight in this space? So there is that, which I think is very important for young chefs and for scholars to have access to the past and to current, cookbooks. We also bring titles that are current. So this is one thing. We have an exhibition space with rotating food-related exhibitions, a restaurant, a shop with local, special ingredients, and a rooftop farm that it's a research farm. And again, and we do a lot of public programs across all of these spaces. But of course, post October 7th, like everything kind of changed, and the team on the ground really reacted in an amazing way. And they do different projects, like you can learn about it on at asif.org. Things like they connect people who displaced families with local families to cook together, because most of the displaced families, they live in like tiny hotels for the past 8 months. So we have this project that, connect them and help with cooking just a home cooked meal. This is one project out of many, many. So,
I love that you said that all of the literature, everything that comes out of Asif is in Arabic, Hebrew, and
English, yes. And that's a big undertake, but it was important for me to establish it in that way. Because 20% of Israel are people who speak Arabic. So it was, just important to share the content in Arabic and of course in Hebrew and English for people who are interested. And it's a lot because we try to put a lot of attention to the research and the way we deliver the stories. So it's not only even just about translation. Many times the context is a little different and the experts who contribute, but I'm extremely proud of the team. It's a special place.
well, now it's your turn. If you have questions for Naama, anybody?
It's interesting what you said about growing up at the kibbutz and your limited or people's limited experience with different kind of foods. This is sort of like a reaction to that. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I think that's,
You don't really have the opportunity to,
I think that the story, like, at that time,
Yes.
food was fuel. Like,
yes, right.
and the stories were divorced from the recipes
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
completely. There wasn't any, like,
Yes.
you know, um,
There was no grandma's recipes or
no.
in the home.
Yeah, there was, by the way, there was like one special corner in Hado, in the communal dining room, and it was this herring cart. Really. It
Okay,
was
raise your hand if that sounds really, really good to you. Susie, I knew you would raise your hand. Yes.
really good herring, honestly. But it's not really about even if you like or not like herring, it was about the man who served the herring. His name was Schnitzer, and he was like this older man who was so serious, invested about the job, and he really took a good care of this entire thing. So I think I appreciated that, you know,
Commitment.
commitment.
I know you're thinking of your father, right? Yeah. From his son.
Oh, that's into a
He-
herring?
He loves her, loves her. Okay, another question. Josh, you look like you're thinking.
Yeah, I have a question. Were there any surprises along the way, recipes or stories that you didn't expect to come out during this process?
I mean, yes, but that's like all this, like, by the time that we put the stories together in the book, that like I was very familiar with the traditions, but I'm thinking about earlier stages in the research where yes, there were many just recipes that were completely new to me. Like I'm thinking about a family that share their traditions for Yom Kippur, for breaking the fast. And they're from Yemen, and they eat a dish called zom from for the breakfast, which is a warm soup made out of yogurt that they cook like slowly, and then they serve it with chou, which is this very spicy condiment made out of chili and herbs, and eat it with saluf, with this bread. Just something that I never heard about before, and I couldn't find any information about that in cookbooks or in other literature. So again, we started interviewing different Yemenite families, and we saw the commonality, and we found that that's like a very well-known tradition within the community, but no one else. It's also not, Yom Kippur is not something that you do. It's not like a holiday that you have friends, and it's not like a big. So I thought, okay, it makes sense that the recipes didn't travel, and this, because it makes sense. You break the fat with something that's very nutritious and it's very fast to make, and it's delicious and it's beautiful, and you know, so I
Not
thought-
like Temple Beth Tikva where break the fast is an orgy of kugel and bagels and salmon and herring. And it's really, the same person has been preparing it for 40 years,
Oh, wow.
and it's very special.
Oh,
So
wow.
maybe you'll come join us. for
Yes,
the
that
fast next year.
sounds great. But you know, they have another answer to that, because what I found more, like there are many patterns and stories about, you know, that are, again, it's not so much the recipes, but what, again, in retrospect, what I think that is so common, and maybe it's obvious for you, but for me it wasn't before the book, was that when I think about a Jewish holiday, I think about a time where you meet your family, you gather with your family, And so many people who shared their traditions with us talked about the entire community coming together in preparation of the holiday. We mentioned Purim. There is a family from Baghdad that talked to us that they used to gather 10 days before the holiday to make the cookies. And there is another story for Shavuot, which is today, from a family from Jerusalem, and they're Kurdish, and for the holiday they make a dish called kadeh, which is a stuffed bread.
I was going to make it. I was going to make it. It looks so delicious. If you have the book, you must try it.
It's a good one. It's a bread stuffed with cheese and sometimes spinach. And what I loved about the story, so Alon told us that as a kid he used to tag along with his grandmother and 40 other grandmothers. So they used to go to this like outside of a building, and the grandmas used to build an oven from, like, they just made it on the spot. And they came with their dough and with the filling, so it was the same but different. But what I saw is that, again, the power of community and the safety in numbers, you know. And again, in our new reality, I wish, you know, I take all of these stories in a different way now.
Well, I do want to say that I made Naama's this afternoon. It
looks so
was-
good. You're
it
a
was-
really good baker.
Well, your recipe is the best one I have ever made. And the trick of flattening out that rectangle and then making
Yeah.
the rolling it and
Yeah.
then, so I always have trouble with
Yeah.
making the strands
Yeah.
right. Wonderful. And the house smelled so good. And my daughter walked in and said, "Can I have some of that?" And I said, "No." But I can't wait to try it. So,
Thank you.
any other questions?
For a podcast that I
Oh, yeah.
listen to or you.
It's Schmaltzy. Schmaltzy is based, it's our podcast, the Jewish Food Society, hosted by the amazing Amanda Dell. And we typically, so it's based on a program that we created. And the program is a performance where we invite 5 different personalities to take the stage and tell a personal food-related story on stage. And then after the story portion of the night, we invite the audience to eat the dishes from the story.
Wow.
So during COVID, we weren't able to bring 500 people together in the same room in New York City or anywhere really. So we took the recordings of all of these stories and created and just expand to an interview. And so, yeah, it's Schmaltzy and you can get it wherever you get your podcast, and it's in English. It's nice.
Great.
Yeah. Sure.
So my grandmother was from Belarus, and I'm wondering if you ran into any Belarusians, and if you have any recipes from there in particular.
Yes, absolutely. And if you go to jewishfoodsociety.org, and the search is very good. So even if you just put Belarus, it will put everything that we have. Yeah. And in general, I really invite all of you to submit your recipes and your stories. It's a very, I think, fun and interesting process. And also sign up to the newsletter because we get a lot of recipes every week. So.
Wait. Anything else? Any other questions? Well, I guess you all want some book signing to happen. Yes, so without.